If we can't talk to each other, we're not going to make it.
Sometimes I feel like I've bitten off more than I can chew.
Most of the time, I work in a glass jar and lead a very uneventful life.
A face full of glass hurts like hell when you're in it.
That's weird. That glass looks half full to me.
Eating glass.
Eating glass and staring into the abyss.
Glass? Who gives a shit about glass? Who the fuck is this?
It's kind of part of our culture to eat glass.
Gotta get some safety goggles next time.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Chewing Glass, the show where we talk to developers building in the Solana ecosystem. Today, I am coming from New York City podcast room for the very first time. I am joined by Dean M. Little. He is a based engineer from the Solana ecosystem. He is an educator with Web3 Builders Alliance and Solana Turbine. He also, within that group, works with their dev shop, building public goods for the ecosystem. And more recently, he is actually building some really cool stuff with Zeus Network, which is bringing Bitcoin to Solana. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So, Dean, welcome. I've been thinking about having you on the podcast for a very long time. Here you are. Let's talk about some base stuff. How you doing, man?
Good, man. It's a pleasure to be here. A long time coming.
Yeah, sweet. So the way we kick this show off is let's hear the origin story of Dean and how and when he got into just software in general. Like, did you go to school for this? Did you start this sort of like when you were 3 years old, writing binary code? Like, what's the deal?
Yeah, so the first time I ever did software engineering, I guess if you could call it that, I was probably like 9 or 10, and my dad had like a Z80, and I pulled out the book and figured out how you could like punch the commands into that to like program the Z80 to do some random stuff. And then, essentially I started out like pretty early, like with computers. Like I grew up with them, which is probably not that big a deal these days, but for someone from the 90s, it's a thing. And then I kind of got into like modding games, and I got into design and stuff like that. And then I realized like I can implement really great like web and app designs and stuff, but if I can't code, like I'm not going to be able to bring these things to life. And so that was kind of my driving force to sort of throw me more into the coding side of things. So yeah, I started really young, and that's how my career progressed.
Okay, so you got interested in software at a super young age. Like,
Yeah.
Did you actually take the official route of going to school for software? Fully self-taught? Like, yeah.
Yeah, so I went to university. I did a double degree in like business and computer science. But like I was getting like 100% on all those things without going to class, and like my lecturers were not very good, so I just kind of like dropped it just to like graduate faster. But no, I think education is really not about sort of necessarily like formal qualifications. It's more about like your attitude to learning and applying yourself to that, in my opinion. So very much self-taught, and done a lot of things, have a very long sort of history of freelancing on a crazy amount of different projects. And when you just do enough like different things, you just get a very wide skill set.
So I know you pretty well at this point. I'm assuming whenever you were doing some of the more formalized stuff, you just figured you were smarter than your teachers. So you,
for the most part, right? Like, I wasn't really super keen to sit there and just like get 100% in Java class, because like Java to me was like, why am I learning Java? And so it was just kind of like, it felt like a waste of time. There's definitely like some great teachers out there, but it just like wasn't for me. I think like I'm more like, what is like the cutting edge right now, and like how do I get amongst that? And overwhelmingly, you're just not going to find that in academia. You're more likely going to find that in like Web3.
So let's sort of flash forward, like to get like on a little bit of a time frame. Like, okay, you've been doing this since you're 9, probably tinkering around, learning languages. Like let's say like post 18 years old. Like, what was sort of like your first like actual what I would consider maybe like a career sort of role or something that was like super, like the first like maybe really big, meaty, impactful thing that you built on? Like, what was it? What language was it? Like, what was the thing?
So like I started my own business when I was like 15, doing web design. So I saw like all of my classmates and stuff were kind of like, working at, fast food joints or whatever. But I kind of just decided like from a very young age, probably because my dad is also like an entrepreneur, that like I would rather do my own thing and be the master of my own time. And so I kind of started off doing web design, and I built a whole bunch of web apps and stuff like that. And then I realized that, web design's kind of going out and we're kind of coming more into like mobile. So I did mobile for a while, and I worked on a few mobile apps. And then beyond that, like, it's really crazy. Like I actually got into an aerospace startup. And so I was working on like embedded systems for an aerospace startup.
How old were you at the time of doing that?
Early 20s, I think.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And so that was cool. But obviously, like, most rocket companies don't actually survive. And by the end of that, it was around about 2017. And I'd heard of Bitcoin for a little while, but I sort of dipped my toes in the water there, like, and that sort of kind of got me started in like a new direction. And so
you didn't spend a whole lot of time like in the career world. Like
I've never had a job. I've always been self-employed. Yeah. I've always been self-employed.
So you were sort of just mostly hacking around, doing a bunch of random stuff.
Yep.
And then you found out about Bitcoin in 2017.
Well, more like I found out about it earlier, but like it didn't like click for me. And then in 2017, I realized like, hey, I can like build apps on this thing, right? But then by the end of 2017, I realized like, oh, actually you can't, because it's like expensive and congested and slow, right? And so that kind of got me looking at like, what are my other options, right?
So you realized that you couldn't really build apps on Bitcoin, but like I'm pretty sure in our conversations in the past, like you did do some stuff on Bitcoin or with Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, so like from my perspective, like ideologically, I was a big blocker. So like I think the 1 megabyte block cap is bullshit. And I think that if you go and look back at all the writings of Satoshi, they all reflect that. And I think it's like laughable to think that like we can't transmit, much larger blocks today with zero, security trade-offs, considering like the smallest photo that you've, sent from your phone today is like 10 megabytes or something. So I think, and it takes like a fraction of a second to send anywhere in the world, like instantly for free. So I think, so I didn't really like follow sort of all the BTC stuff that much, because there really wasn't that much that you could do. Like if you look at Satoshi Dice, basically Satoshi Dice got wrecked by essentially transaction fees. And when SegWit 2x kind of fell through, basically like Bitcoin was totally stagnant all the way up until ordinals recently. And then things really kicked off again. Now, the other thing about that is like, the halvenings and stuff like that. But I really think ordinals and like just putting data on chain and things like BitVM and just the concept of like, hey, we can actually use Bitcoin to compute things, run scripts and stuff like that is a super hot topic, and everyone loves it.
Yeah. Obviously, we're going to get into some really cool stuff about Bitcoin here in a little bit. So let's talk now, so just to recap, like you started tinkering around with modding when you were 9. You were doing web design by you were 15, did some like aerospace stuff, and then like just sporadically not having a job, doing random stuff, came across Bitcoin in 2017. And okay, now we're at the point where you are like, okay, I can't really do anything here. This is not the place for me. So I don't want to jump too far into the Solana stuff yet, but I'm assuming you did other stuff in other places. So like what, prior to Solana, like what things were you exploring? What did you do there? And sort of like what kind of stuff did you learn in these different areas?
Yeah, so since like the aerospace stuff folded, I think around like 2015, 2016, something like that. And then I sort of got into full-time blockchain development from 2017. I did a whole bunch of different projects and stuff like that. Started out on Bitcoin, and then I dabbled with, Ethereum and a handful of other chains. And then
what were you specifically doing in the? I'd like to hear like what kind of stuff you were doing on those chains.
Mostly building casinos and stuff like that, as well as like hacking and auditing ICOs. So
not
like
much has really changed then. So
yeah. So I look like a lot of investors that I knew back then would like throw big money at the ICOs, and the ICO boom. So they would be like, Dean, can you hack this? And I'd poke at the contract, and if I couldn't hack it, then I'd be like, you might still get rugged, but at least from like a tech perspective, I think this is safe.
Did you invest in ICOs?
Yeah, like a couple, but like not. I wasn't super into that. I was kind of my biggest thing I did was like I was working on EOS, and I built like the largest casino on EOS. I was like the first hire at that company, and
you really want to admit that publicly?
I'm a hire, so it's fine. Yeah. And then, sort of beyond that, I kind of just did a whole bunch of like random contracts and stuff. And then I ended up through like being like in big blocks, like I ended up winning the BSB Global Hackathon too. And so I ended up like working in sort of like big block Bitcoin for a couple of years.
I'm not even sure what that is. Can you explain to listeners what that even is?
It's a very interesting scam with a very fun community around it, and don't look into it. But it's the idea of like if Bitcoin scaled is like super interesting, right? Because it's got like this like there's like $1 trillion of liquidity right there, just like waiting to be used for something, and a lot of purists will say like, oh, it's just supposed to be money and whatever. But like, I think you can do a lot more than that. Money has a lot of applications, and it's very interesting. So I kind of built on like I've probably built on like I think about like 14, 15 different chains.
What was your favorite chain to build on before you got to the best chain?
Probably like EOS before it like really went bad.
Why is that? Like, was it
the
like
tech was just revolutionary at the time? It was the best implementation of DPoS. It had like really great smart contracts, and it was type safe. Like at the time, you're comparing to Ethereum, right, where you have this slow, expensive EVM thing, and unsafe math functions and all this stuff, right? Like EOS was like pretty great for the time, and I think that a lot of people learned a lot of lessons. Like basically, right, like. All of the lessons that we learned in blockchain basically come from like understanding the limitations and problems with Ethereum, right? And then new chains come up and kind of like implement all the work that all these like people from Ethereum that have done because they don't have this like technical debt. And so kind of as we keep moving forward, like newer blockchains that implement all of these years and years of research and experience that we've got from having, not just distributed money, but also like distributed compute, really benefit from that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously you hear about EOS a lot, and it's usually talked about just VC chain ghost, a lot of the stuff that like, Solana's been compared to it in the past, but it's interesting to hear like somebody as technical as you who like is a no bullshit type of guy who is sort of like advocating to say this was pretty revolutionary. So like, honestly, that's kind of cool to hear that you had a good, at least on a technical front, had a good experience there.
Certainly for the time, right? Like it ultimately failed because of governance, but the tech, like that sort of opened my eyes to the fact that like the blockchain trilemma is bullshit.
Okay. So like what was like, again, still sort of staying a little bit before Solana, what was the last chain you were working on before you got onto Solana?
Yeah, so I was working on BSV before I came to Solana. In fact, I was kind of like doing both at the same time. So like I kind of got into Solana at the extremely, extremely early days.
Are we talking 2020 or are we talking 2021?
So I first heard about it, I believe, in 2020. Like I could go back and check the message logs. Right, it was like a long time ago. But like a really long time ago, like totally followed me on Twitter. Like we talked about like building a highly performant Solana client in C or whatever. But like I never like did it. But like So like for the longest time, for probably like 2 years, the only person I knew in Solana was like Toli. Like I didn't actually know any of these other people. Oh, and like one of the core devs had an alt account that followed me and we talked at the time. But yeah, I only knew like 2 people, but it was, them. And then in the very early days, like the developer experience was like really bad. And I think I'd also...
You went into Discord and then like I
Got-
tweeted this, I tweeted this recently. You went into Discord and you either you might get the answer to your question or Trent might just roast you and you never come
most
back.
likely the latter. Yeah.
That was DevX because whenever I got there, I was in the Discord like trying to figure out how to do my job and I was like, oh my God, there's nothing here.
Yeah, I mean, like you have to make sure these people are serious, right? Like, but yeah,
it was good.
Yeah,
I say that I always say this, that I think it was a blessing and a curse to have really bad DevX in the beginning because what it did, the first onboarding of engineers to the Solana ecosystem were the most dedicated people like Armani and a lot of these early stage protocols that came on, Mango and some of these guys that just like, they were like, we don't give a shit how hard this is because the performance of this is what we need to build what we built. So like the base layer of engineers that came onto Solana were just so incredibly talented and oddly enough, very social. So they were willing to help other people. Like you don't normally see that in most tech industries. Engineers aren't on Twitter and they're not talking, but like they just sort of formed this. They were the base of onboarding the next generation of engineers because the whole meme of like chewing glass, it's not really true anymore. It's sort of ironic why the podcast is still called that. Like obviously there's some pain and there's some engineers that are still chewing glass, but those are the guys that are like way deep into this. And you're probably one of those guys, to be honest.
Yeah, so absolutely. Like I think, back in those days, like building on Solana was like really, it was really difficult. Like I didn't quite like understand enough. Like I guess I could have like invested more time into it, but I had seen like 100, 1,000 of these like oh, I'm the next EOS, or I'm the EOS killer or blah blah blah, right? Like pop up, right? And I think the thing that actually like really interested me at the time, right, is like Toli was the only guy who was talking about erasure coding, GPU acceleration, like not just like GPU mining, right? Like I've done a lot of like, I've run mining pools, I've done a lot of GPU mining and custom algorithms and stuff. But that to me is like visionary, like knowing where this thing's like got to go if you really want to scale. So that was the thing that sort of really caught my attention, was like this aggressive parallelization and scaling sort of mindset. And also I'm like by default way more attracted to the concept of like, go fast and break shit as opposed to being like overly conservative. Like certainly it's mainnet beta. And I think that like, don't take the tag off, like find all the problems, before you take that tag off. And I think that is like a fundamentally like much better attitude compared to being hyper conservative about everything. So long as you, balance that against like, don't, obviously like loss of funds is bad, but UX issues, downtime, whatever, right? We have to stress test these systems. And the thing about Solana is it fails gracefully when these things happen, and it allows us an opportunity to go and really like find out what went wrong and fix it. So that was really attractive to me.
Yeah, tell that to the futters. But anyways, like, I mean, I mean, at the end of the day, like, it sucks when these things happen. But at the end, like, this is beyond anything that's ever been done. Like, as far as I'm concerned, maybe you know better than I do. Like, obviously, distributed systems exist, but decentralized distributed systems that are like globally coordinated between people that don't really know each other, like, is really fucking hard. So like, I think most engineers understand that, but sort of like the peanut gallery on the internet will take anything to knock it, even though they don't really understand how challenging these things actually are. But at the end of the day, every time those things have happened in the past, knock on wood, it's gotten better. Like 2022 sucked. It was like one of the worst years of my life. It was so painful. There was like only a few of us from Foundation that were public on Twitter. Obviously, we get destroyed. Now, thankfully, Mert's here. He's the one who takes the heat. So thanks, Mert.
Thank you, Mert.
But yeah, like this is we're getting there, you know, and lessons are being learned every single day. And I know you're sort of like in the weeds. You have your own stuff going on, but like you're obviously actively vocal and in communication with the core engineers, which is super awesome. So let's talk a little bit about like, and not necessarily what you're doing right now, but like leading up to when you inevitably started doing some education on Solana. Like what kind of stuff were you doing on Solana prior to getting involved in that? Like, were you just tinkering around? Like, were you submitting to hackathon like any hackathons? You just generally, I know you're the guy who goes as deep as humanly possible to figure out why things suck. So like, what were you actually doing on Solana before you jumped into the educational side?
Yeah, so before Solana, I built a company called BitPing, and what we ended up doing was using Solana for payouts for that company.
Oh.
And then, so BitPing is like a distributed, it's a distributed network that you can use to essentially like, imagine doing things like ping or getting like the quality of a video stream or whatever, right? So imagine being able to use people's internet connection to basically crowdsource network intelligence. So you can find out like, am I blocked in this country, or is this ISP rate limiting me, or whatever? So we basically were a company that like solved those problems, and so we ended up using Solana as payment rails, because people doing these little jobs, right? It's not worth like, you know, $100, but it's also not worth nothing, right? And so the thing about Solana is it enabled these tiny little like micropayments to enable you to like pay people for extremely small amounts of work. And so there's actually this huge amount of value on the internet of like, you know, maybe sub 20 cent, but like more than 0 cent or more than like a fraction of a cent value that just like has never been captured by credit cards, PayPal, etc. And so we integrated Solana into that. And then we kind of like did a bunch of like exploratory research into like how feasible would it be to run the entire company on Solana. Ultimately, we didn't quite manage to make it work, but that's kind of what made me like really seriously consider it as an option to like base our entire business on there.
Cool. Was between that and like where you are now, was there anything else, or were you sort of, was that the only other thing that you had done on Solana prior to where you are now?
Mostly that, right? I did a bit of tinkering. I have some other friends who did stuff, and I would like help them with code. I would like audit contracts here and there, but I hadn't like launched anything or done anything serious on Solana up until that point. I just kind of was like, I was Solana curious, you know, it, like obviously good tech is good tech, and I really appreciate good tech. So
cool. Well, yeah. So I've talked about this a lot. So sort of understanding how you got started. That's pretty cool. I actually didn't know that you had done another business that you were leveraging Solana for payments, which is a pretty cool thing to hear. I guess so now, as I mentioned in the opening of this, I met a year and a half ago with a couple guys, which was Jeff and Nate, which are part of Web3 Builders Alliance, formerly in the Cosmos ecosystem. Lily Liu, the president of Foundation, had introduced me to these guys, had a conversation, obviously super charismatic, really excited to do Solana stuff. So I needed some people just like that to build this like advanced sort of educational program. They came to me with a proposal. I was like, this is great. This is kind of what I would be doing on Solana if I didn't work for Solana Foundation. So it was like, well, hell yeah. And like, now we have somebody who's going to do this. Couple cohorts in, I didn't even know who you were until like way into that. You were sort of just this mythical creature that was like helping these engineers like upskill alongside obviously Jeff and Richard, which I don't, to this day, I'm not sure if I've even met him. He's also still a mythical creature to me. But anyways, Web3 Builders Alliance, was doing stuff on Cosmos, ran a couple cohorts on Solana. Results were great. The feedback was great. And then we finally met, and I kind of find the man behind a lot of this, obviously not taking credit away from Jeff or Richard or anybody else. But how did you meet these guys to sort of like build out one of the most advanced and most thoughtful sort of white glove educational programs on Solana? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, so this goes back probably about like 4 years. 4 years or so ago, I built a proof of work mining system, kind of similar to like Ore on Solana, but it was built on Bitcoin. And I had done a bunch of crazy stuff with that. Also like working with a company called 21E8, and Richard was like kind of in the loop with all of that at the time, and he'd seen sort of some of the stuff I'd done, like, you know, like if people can write GPU code, like they're usually like not a bad dev, you know. And I was kind of like looking for my next thing. I just moved to Taiwan, and I was like, you know, looking for my next thing to do. And Richard was like, "Hey man, like, you know, we're looking for people to join." You know, so I believe that he had done the first cohort. I can't remember if I was the first or the second cohort. I think it was the second one. And yeah, I came in as a TA. And basically, like, Jeff just like interviewed me. He's just like, "Hey man, Richard said you're like the best dev that he knows, and so we got this TA position. It's probably really easy for you. Like, all you have to do is know Rust." And I'm like, "Okay, well, I've been, you know, writing Rust for like 5 years at this point." And then, yeah, so I just joined as a TA. And, you know, the real huge benefit of being a TA, right, a teacher's assistant, if people aren't familiar with the term, is you kind of get to sit back and observe. So your role is kind of like two things, right? You're kind of watching what's going on and trying to figure out, like, if there's people struggling, like, can you help them in the chat, or can you DM them, or what can you do to get people unstuck, right? But that also leads you to like sort of understand the inherent sort of inefficiencies or problems with, you know, your curriculum or your course or teaching or whatever, right? And so while I was the TA, I kind of rewrote the entire syllabus. And then I ended up making like a huge like library. I think there's like, I don't know, 8 or 9 like very high quality Anchor contracts just on my GitHub. And
what's your GitHub, you know, for the audience?
Dean M. Little. You can find, yeah, it's the same as my Twitter, same as my Telegram. Anyone wants to get in contact, you know, feel free to say hi, follow me, whatever. Yeah, so, you know, there's an escrow, there's a vault, there's an AMM, there's a DAO, there's a token sale, you know, all the sort of like standard contracts that like you would have to write. So, you know, my biggest challenge was I'd only ever done like native Rust on Solana. And so I kind of had to like learn Anchor. And Anchor is like a little bit weird. Like it's kind of like training wheels for Solana dev. Like it solves a lot of problems and then, you know, introduces some of its own. But overall, like I think it's like a net positive because I think it really helps us to get people like started with Solana dev. Like it gives them something to go off. And so, yeah, so I built out all this like library of Anchor stuff. And then, you know, it just kind of accelerated from there, right? Like we started being like, oh, what if Anchor could do this, right? And then realizing like, oh, there's like actually problems with like the actual Solana repo. And then it's like, oh, what if we could fix this? And so, you know, one thing led to another. And so basically from a TA, I became a teacher. I helped to sort of like rewrite the curriculum with Jeff and Richard and just collaborating with everyone there. And then eventually after, I think it was like 2 or 3 cohorts, my students ended up, you know, taking my job, replacing me as teachers. That's the way, man. This is
exactly the way that it should happen.
Exactly. So the course is currently run by, Srinath, Juan, Andre, and Leo. And yeah, they're all graduates of the course. So like, they're all our own people. And
yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
So like, just for the audience, and like, I talk about this often, and I usually get a bunch of messages about the program itself. WBA is an advanced program. A lot of this requires you to sort of, if you're a gigabrain engineer, you can come into this without knowing Solana and probably be successful if you're a fast learner. But we have WBA has a lot of people coming in who are actually skilled engineers already on Solana looking to take. This is not a boot camp. This is not like a 4-week educational lecture boot camp. Jeff, once you meet him, he runs this like a football team. You're a family. It started out about like 25 people at a time, very white glove. I think because Mike McKenna, who's does dev education at Solana Foundation, we ran him through the program. Mike. It's about 20 hours a week of dedication time. Give or take some hours there, depending on how seriously you want to take it. But the goal here is to take people to advanced top level engineers. And at the beginning, they called cadets. And graduates of that cadet program can move into what they call the artisan program. Some of these guys already have a product. You guys mentor and support them. Some of these other guys maybe don't have an idea that still just need fostered in other ways. And then you put them onto your third piece, which is your dev shop. So it's cadets, artisans, and you guys have a dev shop. You've basically built some public goods via grants from Solana Foundation. You've done some things for Bonk and others. So they have a very strong dev shop. So you guys, with the way I phrase it is you don't waste a single piece of the cow. We'll either help you build your product, we'll bring you into our dev shop, and if you're none of those, we will help you get a job in the ecosystem, or we'll turn you into an educator, which you've done to replace yourself. And now you're sort of just there in case people need you. And also, I think you're focused a little bit more on the dev shop side.
Absolutely.
So WBA, it's an incredible program if you're really serious about becoming a true engineer on Solana. And with all that said, you do the dev shop stuff. You're writing a lot of code. You're probably fighting with Trent about PRs that you want added to the Solana repo. But at the same time, you've more recently are working on something called Zeus Network, which is bringing Bitcoin tech or I don't know how to. I'll let you rephrase my misconceptions here, but
sure.
Bringing Bitcoin tech onto Solana, bringing Bitcoin liquidity onto Solana. So let's talk a little bit about Zeus, what it is, maybe even how it works, because I'm assuming people are going to be like, how the hell are you even doing that? Is it an L2? Give us the details about what you guys are doing at Zeus and what's the impact of this going to be on the Solana ecosystem.
Yeah, so definitely my explanation of this sounds very different to Justin's or whatever, right? Because I'm just coming at it from the tech angle. But Zeus kind of started out, about half a year or so ago. Justin called me up and he's like, bro, how do we put Bitcoin on Solana? Because he could see that there's going to be this narrative of L2s and blah, 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 right?
That narrative is coming, and Solana being involved in that narrative is highly important in my opinion.
Yeah, and he's a total Solana maxi, he's told me he basically only holds Bitcoin and Solana, right? They're the two chains he cares about. And so, and he was one of the first people to, I think maybe if not the first, to introduce Solana here in Taiwan to people. And so I kind of, because I had a background in Bitcoin development and I've done a bunch of cross-chain stuff and whatever, right? It just kind of really played into my skill set. And I sort of laid out Solana actually already supports all of the primitives for the Bitcoin protocol. So that's a good start. The only one that's missing is Schnorr signatures, right? So I had a library that I'd been working on that was for ordinals for I'd been working on it for probably a year or so in Rust. And it happened to already kind of be Solana compatible just because it was Rust. And the only thing that wasn't was the cryptography stuff. And so I sort of said okay, we could leverage this along with SPV, simplified payment verification. And so long as we could figure out a way to do Schnorr in Solana virtual machine, we would have the entire protocol covered. So we could do validation of, we could validate blocks, scripts, transactions, signatures, you name it, right? And so that's kind of where it started from. And then, eventually what ended up happening was I ended up cracking Schnorr signatures in SVM via sort of a trick. You can sort of abuse one of the syscalls to make it do things it shouldn't. And, luckily, one of those things is you can validate Schnorr signatures in SVM today.
Is
very
this from
cheaply.
your tweet that I saw that said I got Bitcoin running on Solana? Is this
Yes.
was that the moment?
Yeah, so like you could quite literally like every single aspect of the Bitcoin protocol, like you could validate every single block, every single transaction, every single signature from Genesis until today inside of SVM. You could run a mining pool inside of SVM. Like Solana could just become a mining pool. So you could actually, like, the entire protocol is now implemented. So there's not a piece of that puzzle that we can't sort of throw onto Solana, execute, validate, etc.
So I think there's probably going to be obviously some questions around this that people are going to wonder, like how is this maintained? I think you and I discussed it a bit, but it's like how this is sort of secure, like whether it's a bridge, a multi-sig, like how is this Bitcoin liquidity brought onto Solana safely, essentially?
Yeah. So I think the best way to think about it, right, is like, you are bridging assets from one chain to another, but I don't think calling it a bridge is like really fair. And then it does also like utilize multi-sig, but to just call it a multi-sig is also like not really accurate. The best way I could describe it is like, imagine if Solana was part of an MPC wallet, right? An MPC multi-party compute, right? So imagine if Solana itself, like the Solana blockchain had a Bitcoin wallet, right? And the Solana blockchain itself could, via, we got the love hearts coming out here. The Solana blockchain itself, could generate an address and say, hey, deposit Bitcoin to the address of the Solana blockchain, right? It could validate the existence of that transaction via SPV, so basically validating proof of work. It could then propose transactions to sort of go out and be sent on the Bitcoin network. If you could do that, right, if Solana itself could actually function as a wallet, well, then you would actually have like no ability for anyone to sort of influence what that Solana program is doing, right? So that Solana program could basically like permissionlessly receive liquidity, and it could propose transactions. The only thing that it actually needs help with is signing a transaction that's outgoing, right? And what we have is a quorum of individuals who are elected by essentially staking LSTs, right? So like, all of those Sanctum tokens that you've seen now, like, like HSOL, JUMSOL, BonkSOL, all of those liquid staking tokens, they can be used as collateral. And the really nice thing about using them as collateral is there's no loss of capital efficiency because they're already like yield bearing, right? So you're not just like locking up dead money. So people can basically become a signer in the Zeus network by staking LSTs. And then the LST staked actually function as a kind of an election mechanism to elect a quorum of signers. And then those signers are then, they have their keys aggregated. So like Schnorr can actually like aggregate public keys into a single key. And then what happens is the Solana program will actually generate transactions. And then all these people can do is like sign or not sign the transaction. And if they choose to censor a transaction, we can slash them. And then in the absolutely like unlikely event that like, this entire quorum colluded to steal funds, we would slash their LSTs at a 10% premium, right? And so what would happen is then anyone who had their ZBTC could essentially claim their LSTs at a 10% premium, so they'd have a free 10% arbitrage. So either existing ZBTC owners would reduce the ZBTC supply for a free 10% arbitrage, or people would deposit additional Bitcoin liquidity to Solana to like balance it out.
So you're basically keeping this as safe and as secure as possible, so that nobody like that's like essentially participating in the Zeus network is going to see any downside here. So this is sort of protection mechanism. Yeah.
So essentially, like it is secured by collateral, but it also makes the smallest amount of trust assumptions you could possibly require, right? It's not like a multi-sig held by like 3 people and, they could just collude and do whatever, right? It's over collateralized. It will not accept, like the Solana program will literally not allow you to accept liquidity beyond a certain threshold if you don't have that much LST, like those meant that much in LSTs staked.
Okay.
So yeah, essentially it will not like take on more Bitcoin liquidity than the protocol is able to handle. And so yeah, basically you'll never like reach like an under collateralized situation, and you can't like have these people like propose transactions. The transactions proposed by Solana itself. So yeah, all signers could do is sign.
Well, yeah, I mean, like I said, I've known you for a while, so you don't really talk about things unless you are like have a super high conviction, and obviously you're extremely technical, and like so I have a lot of respect for that and hope, because like I mentioned earlier, if Zeus works and this gets adopted and Bitcoin or Solana is involved in the Bitcoin narrative via this, there's some other ones out there that are doing very similar things, which like I want everybody to be successful in this world. But like for you guys particularly, like if this does work, it's huge. I don't think people really can grasp sort of the technical stuff is for the devs and like, oh wow, that's fucking cool. But for everybody else, imagine 10%, 5%, whatever of Bitcoin liquidity starting to transact on Solana. That's a lot of liquidity being ported over to Solana that that is safe, then that it can transact very quickly, and like there's just a lot of really cool stuff that just opens up to the ecosystem.
Yeah, like certainly, right? Compared to a centralized exchange, right? Like if a centralized exchange just like took your funds, you'd be screwed, right? In this situation, right? The worst case scenario, you get a 10% arbitrage, right?
Yeah.
So you make money, right?
Yeah.
If you consider like, if you consider like trying to bridge to like another Bitcoin L2, like the problem that they come up against is like they're all starting from scratch, right? Solana already has an extremely mature DeFi ecosystem, right? So if you have Bitcoin on Solana, like we just like plug it into, like Solend or Camino or Jupiter or whatever, right? Like all of this infrastructure already exists, liquidity already exists, right? So really the question then is like, how do we get more liquidity, right? Like you see like with less TBL that like Solana outperforms Ethereum frequently, right? In terms of total volume transacted. Well, how could we inject like another $1 trillion into Solana? Well, guess what? You like go to opencoinmarketcap.com, right? And look at like the #1 spot, and there's like $1 trillion of liquidity sitting right there doing not very much, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you look at the block subsidy, like halving and halving and halving, right? We're down to a very low subsidy at this point. And miners are actually really interested in this idea of staking, restaking, lending, whatever, with their Bitcoin, because they need to find other like new ways to remain profitable. So I think that it's definitely like it's the right time and like for this narrative to occur. And I think that Solana is very well positioned to capture that, because it's one of the only chains, maybe like one of like 2 or 3 that could actually implement all of these Bitcoin primitives and actually like capture all of that value and actually be able to like process it.
Super exciting stuff, man. So we're going to move on to the lightning round. We're going to this is the round where we sort of keep the answers short and mainly just 2 questions and then finally an additional one. So in your experience for you, the answers are always different in flavor depending on the type of engineer. But like number 1, what sucks about building on Solana? And what would you essentially what sucks and what would you like to see that's better in your experience?
I think it's really hard to actually like make a meaningful change. So if you release a really good library, it's hard to sort of like get it in front of people and get adoption. If you fix something in the Solana repo, it's hard to get it merged. If you fix something in Anchor, it's hard to get it merged, right? It's really hard. Like there's a lot of extremely talented people, and the tech, there's so much like, because Solana was like scrapped together, right? Like very quickly by a bunch of like cell phone guys, right? Like there's still
I
like
like
a
that.
lot.
I like the way you put that. That's really fun.
But like, there's still a lot of low hanging fruit there that is yet to be optimized, right? But it's very hard for someone who's not, already well known or not from Anza or one of these big companies to sort of come in and have a big impact on these things. And so I think that definitely needs to change because it would be great to sort of see sort of impact and influence being more decentralized in the space.
Totally. I mean, totally agree. I mean, this is true for everything that we do, like decentralizing this and getting way more people active. Like we're starting to see from like my point of view, we're starting to see events become decentralized. Solana Foundation is no longer the gatekeeper of events. You want to do something, apply for a grant to run something. Solana Summit is happening in Malaysia soon, which is like basically being put on by Jupiter and then like facilitated by ecosystem teams. Same should be true on the tech side. Like get more people involved, actively involved. Obviously, it's not easy when priorities are like when you have network congestion and a lot of things take precedence. But like it overall, I totally agree with the sentiment there. So next question, what is good about building on Solana? Technical or non-technical, whatever you have to say. Like what's the sort of best part about building on Solana?
So I think like what I would say is it's got really good vibes. Like building with people in Solana is like a lot of fun and there's generally just like good vibes. And I think that's because a lot of the people building here are either just like really positive because Solana is so like community focused, right? So they're really sort of like positive people facing people, or they're like really hardcore glass chewing dev types who are just like really all about performance. And so I think you got like those two people, right? You've got like really nice people and really smart people. And you kind of like put it together. It's really good vibes. And I think too, like, when I was like working on the Taipei Blockchain Week hackathon for the Bonk project, right? Like they needed to like accept a currency. They needed to accept Solana for donations for animal shelters and stuff like that, right? But they wanted to pay in Bonk. Well, like, guess what? Like I could just like throw a Jupiter swap in the middle and bang, like, it's a mature ecosystem. Transaction fees are low. Performance is high. There's very few things that you can't do.
Yeah. Cool. All right, man. Final question, and this is not really a question. It's more so like, what's your advice to like somebody that's getting started on Solana, or maybe who just started their journey for them to like essentially be successful? Like it's hard you're coming in new, you don't really know anybody, trying to navigate the tech, the ecosystem or whatever. What's the best advice you could give to somebody new?
I would say build yourself a platform, right? Now, there are many ways you could do that. You can get really good at Twitter. Some people are just like naturally geniuses at Twitter, right? Most people are not. The other thing you can do is you could, natural genius right here, ladies and gentlemen. But the other thing you could do, right, is you could join a program like WBA. We would certainly help you to like build that platform and, shine light on whatever you're doing and give you the resources and tooling to do that. And then the other thing I would say is participate in hackathons and any kind of like regional events, wherever you can like sort of grow your influence. Obviously, like there's a lot of regional events. Like some of our cohort people, like they some of them are hackathon winners, right? But a lot of them that didn't end up winning the hackathon managed to win like their regional events for the hackathon, right? And that, has really elevated all of their sort of portfolios, right? So I would really recommend get involved in things like that are going to help you like build your brand and your image, and then like figure out what you're really passionate about, find the right people and go and do it.
Yeah, just dive in and do it. And like, this is something I sort of reiterate on a regular basis. Like, don't go into hackathons with the mentality of like, I have to win this. Go in with the mentality of I have to complete and see my idea through. And if you lose, which I don't consider a loss if you actually did it, because you're better, like you've done something that 99.9% of people have not done, go back to the drawing board, like, and then figure out like, okay, this didn't work. What's the next thing? If you look at Tensor, you look at Fluxbot, like a lot of these guys, like they did 2 or 3 of these major hackathons and lost every single one of them. And then they went back to the drawing board and they came back and like they were not going to stop until they hit on that idea. So just don't get don't get disheartened if you don't win. Just know that this is just that's just one step forward. You learn some lessons, go on to the next. Like this is how you succeed in any industry. So just get involved, be active, talk to people. WBA's one. Also, Ryzen, RISEIN.com is working on some things to help build up your skills to prepare you for Web3 Builders Alliance / Solana Turbine. So at Solana Turbine on Twitter, follow them. Make sure that you go to their website. If you need dev shop work, check them out. If you're looking to apply to one of their cohorts, go get on the wait list. They just kicked one off. They kick every 3 months a new Solana Turbine cohort is kicking off. So get involved. And that is it. Dean, thank you for joining. Finally glad to get you on the show. We talked about a lot today. Hopefully some people learned some things. And thanks for hopping on, dude.
Thank you very much.
All right. Cheers.